Standstill Girl is a game I remember playing when I was a kid. That said, I didn't remember anything about it except for the idea that I thought that this game was really good. We're playing it now in 2023, I'm happy to know that I remembered correctly. This is a turn-based RPG developed by Uta. This game originally released in Japanese in 2007 and got a translation into English in 2013. This game makes the 2000 engine basically unrecognizable. This is due to them implementing a very pretty art style and changing all the default things for the engine, which ends up leading to an incredibly unique and good experience. All the assets in this game are really good, from the music to the art style and stage design. From the credits, it seems like some of the assets were freeware, with some tweaking implemented to them, and those freeware assets were really well implemented into this game. I have a lot of things to praise this game on, with my biggest praise that I can give being the entire gameplay. This gameplay is like none I've seen before in an RPGmaker game, both in this series and in general. So far, we've only had two types of gameplay in the series: default RPGmaker combat and puzzle walking sims. This game has its very own extremely unique combat and gameplay system. The combat consists of you being able to use 5 actions. These actions range from just using a basic item or fleeing to guarding, skills that deal damage, skills that provide healing, skills that debuff enemies, and a mix of the previously mentioned. The way that this works is that instead of having equipment in this game, your equipment is the skills. There's an accessory slot, but that just adds mostly a stat boost or some sort of modifier to combat. So what you do is equip what 5 skills you see fit and use those to win battles. You can always equip and unequip skills, and as you progress through the game, you unlock more skills. While in combat, some skills take something to be used. The most basic thing they will use to activate is an energy core. You get an energy core at the start of every turn, and you can have up to 4 at a time. The basic skill in this game, Shock, requires you to have 1 to use. But since you get 1 every turn, you can always use the skills you please. That said, some skills may require more than 1 energy core. So sometimes in combat, it might be better to save up a turn by guarding, or using a skill that doesn't consume an energy core. You can also press the up arrow to use the Just Watch action, which is basically just a skip a turn. I personally don't recommend this since it might be better to just always have guard equipped, but maybe you want to play around with a build that doesn't use guard, so then you can use it. Aside from energy cores, the other requirement for activating a skill is some of your HP, or LP in this case. Some skills take a set amount of LP or a percentage of it. Every time you're outside of combat, you regain health by walking around. But since this game uses random encounters, if you end up walking too much, you might end up in another fight. Which at least puts a balance of you being able to regenerate outside of combat, and also not abusing it since you can at one point just get into a fight. This is a really fun and good combat system. It allows you to play with a lot of separate builds and makes you want to strategize if the setup you're going for is a good one or need some tweaking before you encounter a center enemy. Not to mention that the actual look of the combat is really impressive, with some insane custom animations and a very easy to navigate and pretty looking UI. For the gameplay outside of combat, it consists of you walking around looking for orbs. In every stage, there are 5 stages in this game, there are a handful of orbs which, when you interact with them, force you into combat. Depending on the color of the orb, you may get a different result. In a stage, you will most commonly encounter green orbs. These are optional fights for extra loot. Then there's 3 blue orbs which you need to interact with so you can continue on to the boss of that area, represented by a red orb. You cannot interact with the red orb until you have taken care of the blue orbs first. You can always check in the menu how many blue orbs you still have to beat. When you beat the 3 blue orbs, the red orb becomes interactable, meaning you can take on the final boss of the area. After you beat it, you can continue to the end of the stage, where a cutscene plays out and it marks as you clearing that stage. This gameplay loop is pretty well done, since it forces you to actually try exploring the stages first, instead of just rushing right through trying to kill the final boss. Normally I would have a problem with being unable to just continue as I'd like, but going around trying to look to the orbs has been done in a really player friendly way, with you being able to track your progress and it doesn't end up becoming repetitive since there's only 5 areas. And since the blue orbs really stand out, it's really easy to just go around and find them. So for me, instead of it becoming a big chore and something I was looking forward to, it ended up being pretty fun, for me at least, and I didn't end up getting frustrated or annoyed with it. The last thing that I want to mention is that the gameplay and combat is not level based. Thank fuck. Whenever you win a fight, you get rewarded with force, which is this game's currency. You can use force to buy items in town, but its more important use is to level up your stats. There are 3 main stats in this game. LP, which is just how much health you have. The higher the level, the more health you have, and also the faster it regenerates outside of combat. Psy, which is the potency of your skills. The higher the level, the more damage you do with your skills, or the more health you recover with them. And lastly, Agility, which is just how fast you act in combat. The higher the level, the faster you get a turn. It's both extremely simple and also really fun to mess with, since you always get force after every battle, instead of having to level up, like in Tales of the Drunken Paladin for example. You can almost always upgrade one of your stats after a battle, and the cap for them is 999, so if you want you can dump all your points into Psy and one-shot every enemy in the game, which is what I did. Or if you want, you can become an unkillable monster by boosting your HP to max, or bully your opponents by just never letting them have a turn. Or you can go for the vanilla choice of balancing them around. You being able to freely choose what stats you want boosted, alongside having a lot of builds with the skills you use, and having basically no cap, makes this a phenomenal experience with how much liberty you get to customize. It's one of the best gameplay systems I've played so far, since I love to be able to have extremely varying builds in the palm of my hand, without me being forced through hoops of endless grinding for levels. For me, the weakest aspect of the game is the base story, which, don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed, but compared to the other aspects of the game, it falls a bit behind. Quick spoiler-free summary, you follow around Alice, who lives in the Land of Time, a place where there is no past or future, only the present. The Land of Time is a place full of these creatures called Shades, alongside another human called Tiska, who is in charge of a big clock in the middle of the place which controls the time in the world of the living. So basically, the Land of Time is like another realm outside of the real world. One day, the hands of the clock get broken off, and all its pieces scatter onto the world of the living, making all time in the human world stop. Alice goes into the stopped world to recover the pieces, and while she does this, she will recover memories from her past, and find out what led her into being in the Land of Time. It has some pretty decent world building, but the actual story at most was decent to me. For me, this is probably because there are like only 2 real characters in the game, with Alice being the one that gets the biggest focus and character development. Even in the dev room, it is mentioned how Tiska ended up getting the short of the stick and ended up being a hurdle, especially when most of the focus is set on Alice. The story has 3 endings, a bad, good and true ending, and honestly the conclusion to the story is alright, even if really bizarre, especially with the comedic tone of the post-true ending scene. The biggest appeal to me was the world building and some of the backstory for Alice. I did enjoy the world more than the actual base story, but that doesn't mean that I didn't like the story at all. I had fun with it, and Alice's backstory is pretty neat. Probably not the right word for it. At this point you've probably caught on that I've only been talking about positives. That's because I barely have any negatives about this game. What I have the most with this game is nitpicks, since these flaws are so minuscule that they barely impacted my experience of the game. Here are my nitpicks. You can only buy items one at a time, and items are one use in combat, even if you have more than one in your inventory. After using the combat, you always have to re-equip that item, which is a little bit annoying. There's a farming mechanic which is really out of the way, and it only allows you to plant 2 seeds max. Neat idea, but it wasn't really implemented in a good way. The last of the red shades is hidden for no reason, and that one really annoyed me trying to find him. All the other shades are clearly visible throughout the game, but this one is put in a secret hole in the wall. That one actually annoyed me. The keybinds are really interesting. To sprint you need to hold down the interact key, which is a bit annoying, especially when you have escape, X, C, V, B, and N as all menu. Maybe one of those could have been sprint separately. Also, this game doesn't need double ASD, which is pretty common. Instead, it uses the arrow keys and HAKL, which is odd and I wanted to mention because it was kind of funny. Like I said, at most I would qualify these as nitpicks. Aside from the red shade one, these barely impacted my enjoyment of the game. The game itself was noted as being development hell. It still being able to release was a miracle, and with the amount of fun I had with the actual game, I am happy that it was able to release. Standstill Girl is one of the better RPGmaker games, both from its beautiful visuals, nice music, and just absolutely great gameplay. I really recommend you play this one just because of how fun this game is. I want to put this above Off. Off may have a more recognizable style and a cooler world and story, but the gameplay in Standstill Girl made me enjoy it more than Off. So that's why I'm putting it above Off, even if they're only apart by a slight margin. Finally, a game with good fucking combat. On to the next game. Okay. Here we go again. Let's see.